From the day the child learned to walk, fear walked beside her. It lived in the walls of the small house, in the cracked floor, and in the sound of footsteps coming closer. She was born a girl, but that truth was buried early, hidden like something dangerous. In that home, being a girl was not safe. Her father believed girls were weak, useless, and a curse. His anger filled the rooms more than air ever did. When he shouted, even the shadows seemed to shrink away. Her mother understood very quickly that love alone would not protect her child. So she made a choice no mother should ever have to make. She cut the child's hair short one night while the girl slept. The next morning, she dressed her in old clothes meant for boys. Loose shirts, long pants, shoes too big. She whispered again and again, "From today, you are a boy. Never forget that. This is how you survive." The child did not fully understand, but she understood fear. She learned it faster than words. She learned when to stay quiet, when not to cry, and when to disappear into corners. Her real name was never spoken again, even in whispers, even in dreams. At home, she answered to a boy's name. Outside, she walked like one too. Head down, shoulders stiff, eyes alert. Her father barely looked at her after that. To him, she was just another boy in the house. That distance became safety. Silence became protection. Every day without his anger felt like a small victory. But safety came at a cost. The child had to erase herself piece by piece. She learned to lower her voice. She practiced it until it felt natural. She learned how boys sat, how they walked, how they laughed. She avoided mirrors because they reminded her of the lies she lived. When she bathed, she was careful and quick. When she changed clothes, she turned her face away as if her own body was something she wasn't allowed to see. Outside the house, life was not easier. The neighborhood was harsh, and children noticed everything. She stayed quiet at school, never joined games, never raised her hand. Teachers thought she was shy, slow, or strange. Other boys thought she was weak. She was pushed, teased, and ignored. She accepted all of it because attention was dangerous. Being invisible felt safer than being known. At night, she lay awake listening to her parents argue. Money was always a problem. Her father blamed everyone for his failures. Her mother carried the weight silently. Sometimes the girl saw her mother crying alone, wiping her face before anyone noticed. Those moments hurt more than the shouting. The girl wanted to help, but she was just a child living inside a lie. She started doing small jobs early, carrying bags, cleaning yards, running errands. People liked that she worked hard and never talked back. They said she was a good boy. Each time she heard those words, something inside her twisted. She did not correct them. She could not. The lie had become her shield. There were moments when she almost forgot who she was. The longer she lived as a boy, the more distant her real self felt. Sometimes she wondered if that girl had ever truly existed, or if she had imagined her. Other times, she felt that girl screaming inside, trapped and unheard. Her mother tried to protect her in small ways. A gentle touch on the shoulder, a quiet smile, a warm meal saved just for her. But even her mother avoided talking about the truth. Fear ruled them both. Love had to stay quiet to survive. One evening, her father came home drunk and angry. He shouted about money, about respect, about life being unfair. The girl froze in her place, heart racing. She knew one wrong look could change everything. Her mother stepped between them without a word. That night, the girl realized something clearly for the first time. Her life would always be about hiding unless something changed. As the years passed, the fear did not disappear. It only changed shape. It followed her to school, to work, to sleep. It reminded her every day that the truth was dangerous. She dreamed of a life where she could breathe freely, but those dreams felt foolish. People like her did not get miracles. They learned to endure. Still, deep inside, a quiet strength grew. Fear taught her patience. Hiding taught her awareness. Pain taught her resilience. She did not know it yet, But these things were shaping her for a future she could not imagine. At the end of part 1, she is still living as a boy. Still hiding. Still afraid. But fate has already noticed her. And soon the world that never truly saw her will be forced to look closer. The days that followed were not easy. The girl, who everyone believed to be a boy, had learned long ago how to move quietly, how to blend in, and how to avoid drawing attention. Her father had been cruel and demanding, and any small mistake could have turned into punishment. She had built a life of shadows, always alert, always careful. But even in that small, hidden world, moments of small joy had found their way in, like the warmth of the sun on her face, or the rare smile from someone who had no reason to care about her. In the morning, she would wake before anyone else. The house was cold, and the wooden floorboards creaked under her careful steps. She would quietly get herself dressed, pull her hair back, and make sure she looked no different from any boy her age. She had learned to move her hands, her voice, and even her walk to match what everyone expected. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with noise merchants shouting their wares. Children playing in the streets, but she always kept her head down, her eyes avoiding contact, her ears listening for any sign of danger. Her mother had left long ago. She could not remember the sound of her laughter or the smell of her hair. The father had been all she had for years, and he had taught her fear before he taught her love. She remembered the nights when he would enter her small room unexpectedly, his anger flaring at the slightest mistake. She had learned to lie, to nod, to smile, even when her stomach twisted with fear. That fear had become a part of her, woven into her every thought, her every breath, and so she had hidden. Hiding was safer. Hiding was life. She went to the market in the afternoons, carrying small baskets for neighbors, running errands, and earning a few coins. It was exhausting, but it was also a place where she could watch people, observe them, and imagine what life might be if fear did not rule every corner. She had friends, though few. Children would sometimes play with her, unaware of the truth she kept hidden beneath the surface. They knew her as a boy. She allowed them to believe that. It was easier that way. Easier than explaining the tangled, impossible truth of who she really was. One day, as she was delivering bread to a small family on the edge of the neighborhood, she noticed a new figure in the town square. He was different from anyone she had ever seen, tall, confident, and somehow commanding attention without even trying. His clothes were finely made, his shoes polished, his eyes sharp as if he could see through everything. Through lies, through fear, through every secret people tried to hide. He carried himself with an air of authority that was unusual in their small town. Children stopped their games to stare, and adults whispered among themselves. Everyone seemed to know him, or at least, everyone was afraid of him. The girl kept her distance. She felt the familiar prickling of fear, but this was different. It wasn't the same fear she felt for her father or the neighborhood bullies. This was curiosity mixed with caution, a strange feeling she hadn't felt in years. She watched him as he moved through the crowd, shaking hands with merchants, exchanging brief smiles with children, and offering coins to beggars. Something about his presence seemed warm, yet powerful, as if he could protect or punish in equal measure. She had never felt safe around anyone, yet she couldn't stop looking. That evening, she returned home. Her father was in a particularly foul mood. He berated her for minor mistakes, dropping a bowl, spilling water, forgetting to sweep a corner properly. She endured it silently, nodding, lowering her gaze, holding back tears. When he finally left the room, she allowed herself a deep sigh. The shadows of her room, the quiet, the solitude, all felt like a sanctuary. But even in that safety, her mind kept drifting to the man in the square. Who was he? Why did he make her feel something she couldn't name? Something that felt like hope? The following days, she found herself drawn to the market again and again. She started observing him from a distance, learning his habits. He came in the morning, spoke politely with everyone, and often left in the late afternoon with a small group of assistants. There was something about the way he treated people with kindness, even when they were poor, even when they were strangers. People who were usually fearful around outsiders smiled at him. He was not like anyone she had met before, and yet she dared not approach him. Fear was a habit, and habits die slowly. One afternoon, her path crossed with his in an unexpected way. She had been carrying a basket full of vegetables when the bottom gave way, sending tomatoes rolling across the street. People laughed, some shouted insults, and she bent quickly to gather them. He appeared beside her, bending down without hesitation to help her collect the scattered vegetables. She looked up, startled, and their eyes met. There was no judgment, no ridicule, only a calm, steady gaze that seemed to understand the chaos around them. "You're careful," he said, his voice soft but confident. "But even the careful drop things sometimes." She froze, unsure how to respond. Words were dangerous, and she had no idea what to say. For the first time, someone had spoken to her without suspicion, without fear, without cruelty. She mumbled a quiet, "Thank you," almost as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile moment. He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile, and nodded before walking away. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That simple act, that small recognition of her existence, had planted a seed in her heart. She didn't know it yet, but that seed would grow, slowly breaking through the walls of fear she had spent her life building. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The fear that usually dominated her thoughts seemed quieter, almost distant. She found herself imagining conversations, imagining kindness, imagining a life where she didn't have to hide. And with every day that passed, she started noticing small things about herself: her laugh when no one was watching, the way she could dream without trembling, the little acts of bravery she had performed without realizing. She had survived for so long by hiding, but now, for the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of courage. At school, she tried to be like everyone else, yet she was different. She had learned to fight quietly, to endure without complaint, and to read people with precision. Her classmates still treated her as a boy, and she didn't correct them. But when she looked at the world, she began seeing cracks in the masks everyone wore. Some smiled, some laughed, but behind the smiles were secrets, fears, and unspoken truths. She began to understand that she was not the only one carrying burdens unseen. Everyone had hidden struggles, even if they didn't show them. That thought gave her a strange kind of comfort. Her father, meanwhile, remained a looming shadow over her life. He continued to demand obedience, continued to punish, and continued to instill fear. But the girl was changing. She started thinking of small ways to assert herself without inviting punishment. A word spoken with care, a glance held a little longer, a question asked when it was safe. These tiny acts were dangerous, yet exhilarating. For the first time, she realized that life could be different. Life could be more than hiding in fear. And that realization terrified and thrilled her at the same time. One evening, as she was finishing chores in the house, she heard a soft knock on the door. Her heart raced. Visitors were rare, and she had learned to fear them. But when she opened the door, she was met with the sight of the man from the square, standing there with a calm, open expression. He didn't seem imposing or threatening, but there was an unmistakable authority in his presence. He smiled warmly and held out a small bag of food. "I thought you might need this," he said simply. She accepted it cautiously, her hands trembling slightly. No one had ever shown her such simple kindness without expectation, without suspicion. She wanted to ask why he was helping, what he wanted, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, a faint smile escaping despite herself. In that moment, something shifted inside her, a tiny spark of trust. A quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as she had believed. That night, she lay awake, thinking of him, thinking of the future. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond hiding. Fear would always be there, lurking, waiting for mistakes. But maybe, one day it wouldn't control her completely. And maybe, in that future, she could step into the sunlight without trembling, speak her truth without fear, and finally be seen for who she truly was. Life began to shift in subtle ways for the girl. The days no longer passed with the same heavy weight of fear that had ruled her existence for so long. She still moved carefully, still watched every word and gesture. But now there was a spark in her heart, a small, delicate hope that perhaps life could be more than hiding. That spark was connected to the man who had shown her kindness, who had noticed her without suspicion, who had seen her existence and acknowledged it. She began to look forward to the moment she might see him in the town square, and she even allowed herself to linger a little longer when running errands. Her eyes would search for him among the crowds, and when she spotted him, a sense of calm washed over her. It was strange, confusing, and thrilling all at once. He had become a silent presence in her life, one she could not yet approach freely, but whose mere existence offered a sense of comfort she had never known. Her father remained a constant storm. He was unpredictable, capable of rage over the smallest mistakes. One morning, she accidentally broke a glass while carrying water to the kitchen. The crash of the glass sent a shiver down her spine even before he entered the room. His footsteps were heavy, and she felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach. He scolded her harshly, calling her clumsy and careless, and for a moment she shrank into herself, wishing she could disappear entirely. But something inside her had begun to change. She no longer responded with tears or trembling. She listened quietly, nodded, and carried out his orders with careful precision. That small, silent defiance, holding herself together, not breaking down completely, was the beginning of her quiet strength. As weeks passed, she began noticing small changes in herself. She found moments to explore her surroundings, to study people without being noticed, and to imagine what life might be like beyond fear. The market became a secret world of observation and reflection. She would watch how people interacted, how they smiled at one another, how kindness could exist even in difficult circumstances. She began to dream not the frightened, desperate dreams of a girl trying to survive, but vivid dreams of freedom, friendship, and the possibility of a better life. The man she had seen in the square continued to be a presence in her life, though still distant. He seemed to take notice of small details. Others overlooked the tired merchant struggling to carry a basket, a child who had fallen and scraped a knee, a woman whose smile hid exhaustion. Every day she observed him helping in little ways, quietly, without drawing attention to himself. And each day, she felt a growing admiration for him, mixed with something she could not yet name. She began leaving small offerings in the market: fresh bread, flowers, or a smile, hoping he might notice her too. One afternoon, while delivering vegetables to a neighbor, she noticed him speaking with an elderly man who often sat alone near the fountain. She watched from a distance as he offered the man water, spoke with gentle words, and listened patiently. The girl felt a pang of longing. She had never known such patience or kindness in anyone's heart. She had known cruelty, anger, and indifference. She had learned to survive in fear. But this man, this stranger, showing her that life could hold something different, something worth reaching for. That evening, as she returned home, she found her father in an unusually dark mood. His anger was sharper than usual, his eyes harder, and his voice colder. He scolded her for tasks done poorly, tasks she had performed to the best of her ability. She felt the familiar surge of fear, but it was tempered now by something new: determination. She began to speak, her voice low but steady. She explained what she had done, how she had tried, and why mistakes had happened. Her father's brow furrowed, and for the first time he did not strike her or shout. He simply stared, as if confused by her courage. The girl did not retreat. She had found a small power within herself, the power to speak, to exist, and to be seen, even by someone who had spent years teaching her fear. Days turned into weeks, and she continued her quiet transformation. She found small ways to assert her self-correcting errors before they were noticed, speaking to neighbors with confidence, and learning skills that could one day help her escape the world of hiding she had lived in for so long. Her secret, carefully maintained identity as a boy was still necessary for safety, but it no longer felt like a prison. It was a mask she wore to survive, but beneath it, she was learning to breathe, to think, and to hope. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm forced her to take shelter under a small awning near the square. The streets emptied quickly, leaving only a few brave souls. She huddled under the awning, holding her basket close, watching the rain streak down in sheets. And then she saw him standing at the edge of the square, unbothered by the rain, looking around as if searching for someone, Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she felt a jolt of recognition, a warmth in her chest that made her stomach flutter. She wanted to run, to hide, but something stronger held her in place. For the first time, she did not want to hide from him. The man approached, holding a small umbrella that he offered to her without words. She hesitated, then accepted it, feeling the warmth of human kindness in a way she had never experienced before. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets and the town square, and she felt a strange sense of renewal. In that moment, fear seemed distant, replaced by the strange, intoxicating feeling of being seen, of being acknowledged, of being recognized as someone more than a shadow. Over the next few weeks, their encounters became more frequent. He would sometimes offer a few words, a smile, or a nod. She began to look forward to these moments, though she never dared to speak too much, never dared to reveal too much. Her life was still bound by fear, still constrained by her father's shadow. But there was now a light breaking through, subtle and steady. She began practicing small acts of bravery in her daily life, helping others quietly, standing up for herself in minor ways, and trusting her instincts more than she had ever dared to before. At home, the tension remained. Her father continued to demand obedience, but she noticed small changes in her own reactions. She no longer trembled at every word. She no longer cowered at every glance. Instead, she listened, obeyed when necessary, and retreated only when she had to. Her fear was still present, but it was no longer absolute. She had begun carving out a private space of courage within herself, a space that no one could take away. One evening, she found a quiet moment to herself in the attic, a small space filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. She sat on the floor, breathing in the dust and silence, and allowed herself to think. She thought about her life, about the fear that had ruled her, about the small moments of kindness and recognition that had begun to change her. And she thought about him, the man who had seen her without judgment, who had offered her safety, who had reminded her that life could hold more than fear. Tears came unbidden, not of sadness, but of release. She had carried so much alone for so long. She had hidden her identity, her feelings, her very self. And now, in this quiet space, she allowed herself to feel, to hope, to imagine a life where she could be herself without fear. A life where she could speak her truth, find safety, maybe even find happiness. Little did she know. The man who had quietly entered her life was beginning to notice more than just her presence. He had observed her courage, her quiet determination, and her careful kindness. He had seen her struggle to survive in a world that had never been kind, and he had begun to wonder who she really was, what secrets she carried, and why there was a strength within her that shone through even in the darkest moments. The days ahead would bring challenges, as they always did. Her father's shadow remained, and the dangers of being discovered were real. But for the first time, she felt that she was not entirely alone. There was someone who had begun to understand her, who had begun to see beyond the mask she wore. And that knowledge, fragile and tentative though it was, gave her courage. She began planning, in her mind, small steps to protect herself, to grow stronger, and to prepare for the possibility of a life beyond hiding. She started observing the town more closely, noting the safe routes, the places to hide, and the people she could trust. Each day, she practiced patience and strategy, learning to navigate the world with more confidence, more skill, and more awareness. She had learned to survive through fear, but now she was learning to live through courage. Her encounters with the man continued to be brief but meaningful. A nod, a word, a shared glance, small moments that hinted at something deeper, something that neither dared to acknowledge fully yet. And in those moments, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be more than the shadow of fear. A future where she could speak, move, and exist freely. A future where she could finally be seen for who she truly was. Little did she know, that future was closer than she realized. And the man who had quietly entered her life was about to play a role that would change everything. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger, challenges, and revelations. But for the first time in her life, she felt that she was ready not just to survive, but to step into the light, to embrace her true self, and to face the world with courage, hope, and the quiet strength she had been building all along. The seasons were changing, and with them, life seemed to shift for the girl. Autumn brought crisp mornings, golden leaves, and longer nights. The rhythm of the town had not changed, but she felt a subtle difference within herself. Fear no longer controlled every breath. There was now a quiet strength, a careful courage, and a curiosity about life that was stronger than the old shadows she had carried for so long. Her father remained a constant presence of tension. He had not grown gentler, and some days he was angrier than before. Yet she had learned to navigate his moods with care, speaking when necessary, retreating when it was wise, slowly understanding his patterns. Over time, she noticed that even he seemed to recognize a change in her. She no longer trembled at every word, and she no longer let his threats consume her. He would scowl, demand obedience, and punish when he wished, but she met his anger with quiet composure. Earning a mixture of frustration and curiosity from him, school continued as before, though her attention was divided. She studied, performed her tasks carefully, and kept her hidden identity as a boy. But now, she watched her classmates with new eyes. She noticed the small acts of courage they sometimes displayed, the private kindnesses that went unseen, and the hidden fears behind even the brightest smiles. She realized that life was a collection of hidden struggles, and that everyone carried burdens unseen. That realization gave her comfort, a sense that she was not entirely alone, even if no one knew her true self. The man from the square had become more than a fleeting presence in her life. Their encounters, though brief, were becoming deliberate. He would notice when she worked hard in the market, when she offered a small gesture to help someone, or when she navigated the town's challenges quietly. He began leaving small tokens of kindness, sometimes a few coins, sometimes food, sometimes a word of encouragement. She accepted them cautiously at first, but slowly, a silent bond began to form, one rainy morning. As she was delivering bread to a distant part of town, she found herself trapped by the sudden downpour. The streets were slick with water and puddles formed quickly, making movement difficult. She struggled to keep her basket from tipping, but the weight of the rain and the wind made it almost impossible. She was wet, shivering, and terrified someone would notice her struggle and laugh. Then, as if out of nowhere, he appeared. He offered her a hand, steady and strong, helping her stabilize the basket. He did not lecture, he did not judge, and he did not demand. He simply helped. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled gently, nodding. "Everyone needs help sometimes," he said. And just like that, something inside her shifted again. She realized that kindness could exist even in the hardest of worlds. She realized that trust, even small, was possible. That encounter became a turning point. She began thinking more boldly, imagining steps she had never dared to consider. Could she speak to him more? Could she let him see her as she truly was, not the boy she pretended to be? Could she imagine a life where fear did not rule her every thought? Each question frightened her, yet the possibility thrilled her. She began planning in secret, preparing herself for the chance that one day she might reveal her truth. At home, her father's scrutiny had grown sharper. He was suspicious of the changes in her demeanor, the quiet confidence she now carried. He asked questions, watched her closely, and occasionally made veiled threats. Yet she remained composed, careful not to reveal the growing strength inside her. She had learned that survival required patience, and she began to cultivate it like a skill, observing, listening, and waiting for the right moments. One evening, she overheard a conversation between her father and a neighbor. Her father spoke of a wealthy man visiting the town. It's a man who was powerful, influential, and someone to be respected or feared. The girl's heart raced. Could it be him? The man who had quietly entered her life, who had shown her small kindnesses, who had stirred a hope she could hardly name. She listened carefully, committing every word to memory, understanding that the presence of this man might change her life in ways she had not yet imagined. Days passed, and her cautious curiosity grew stronger. She began to take small risks, lingering a moment longer in the square. Observing him as he interacted with the townspeople, noting his habits, his kindnesses, his patterns, she started leaving small notes for him, carefully folded, tucked where he might notice. They were simple messages, words of thanks, small observations. Quiet thoughts, but each one carried a piece of herself, carefully hidden, yet reaching out in trust. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the square, watching him from a distance. He noticed her immediately, nodding in recognition. Her heart raced. She wanted to run, to hide, to avoid attention, but something stronger held her in place. This was no longer the frightened child who had lived only in shadows. This was someone beginning to emerge, someone beginning to trust, someone daring to exist in the light. He approached slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished, but she did not. She stood her ground, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes meeting his. "You've been helping," she said quietly, unsure if she should speak at all. He smiled, a calm, reassuring expression. "I have," he said, "and I will continue, because everyone deserves a chance." Those words, simple as they were, carried weight she had never experienced. They carried acknowledgement, respect, and recognition. That evening, she returned home, her mind racing. She thought about the risks she had taken, the small acts of courage she had displayed, and the bond that was quietly growing between her and the man who had entered her life. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she could be more than the shadow her father had forced her to become. A future where she could speak, move, and live freely. A future where she might even reveal the truth she had hidden for so long. Her father, however, remained a looming presence. His suspicion had grown, and she noticed the way his eyes followed her, the way his questions had become sharper, more probing. She understood that her path forward would not be easy. Every act of courage carried risk. Every word spoken could lead to punishment. Yet she also knew that fear could no longer control her entirely. She had discovered a strength within herself, a quiet resilience that even he could not extinguish. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the sun set, she thought about the man and the small kindnesses he had offered. She realized that she had begun to trust him, not blindly, but with a careful, measured hope. And she understood that this trust was dangerous. If her father discovered it, if anyone discovered her secret, the consequences could be severe. Yet the possibility of connection, of safety, of someone who truly saw her, was too powerful to ignore. She began to write in secret, jotting down thoughts, plans, and feelings she could not share with anyone. Each word was a small act of defiance, a step toward reclaiming herself. She wrote about her fears, her dreams, her longing for freedom, and her hope that one day, someone would see her for who she truly was. Writing became a lifeline, quiet rebellion against the life she had been forced to live. The man's visits continued, though still cautious. Sometimes he would leave a gift, a word, or a brief conversation. Each encounter was brief but meaningful, each one building trust, understanding, and a subtle bond that neither of them yet fully acknowledged. She began to notice the way he observed her, not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with careful attention, as if he were trying to understand her without forcing her hand. One day, he spoke to her for the first time at length. They were sitting under the shade of a large tree in the square. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets glistening. "You are different," he said softly. "Not like others. You carry something inside you that is rare. Courage, kindness, patience, strength." Shh. She blushed, unsure how to respond, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. No one had ever seen her in that way. No one had ever acknowledged her inner strength, her struggles, or her quiet resilience. Their conversation continued, gentle and slow, with each word carefully measured. She found herself revealing small pieces of herself, the thoughts she had kept hidden, the dreams she had dared not speak aloud. And he listened, truly listened, without judgment or expectation. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as a boy, not as a shadow, but as herself. That evening, she returned home. her heart full of hope and fear in equal measure. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult. Her father's shadow remained, her secret identity was still a necessity, and the world was far from safe. Yet for the first time, she believed in the possibility of a life beyond fear. A life where she could speak, move, and exist freely. A life where trust and kindness were not illusions, but real forces that could shape her destiny. And in that moment, she realized that her journey was no longer just about survival. It was about discovery, of courage, of trust, of identity, and of the possibility that one day, the girl hidden behind the boy could step fully into the light, be seen, and be accepted for who she truly was. The days that followed brought a mixture of hope and tension. The girl felt stronger than she had ever been, yet the shadow of fear from her father still lingered. Each morning, she rose with careful determination, preparing herself for the challenges ahead while holding on to the small moments of courage she had been cultivating. Her life had always been one of hiding, but now with every step she took, she was learning what it meant to live. Her encounters with the man in the square grew more deliberate. He began to seek her out, not for pity or curiosity, but with a quiet respect that made her heart race. Sometimes they would talk for hours under the shade of the old tree, speaking softly so that no one else could overhear. He never pressured her, never asked for more than she was willing to give, and never judged the walls she had built around herself. Slowly, she began to share more, revealing pieces of her story, her fears, and the struggles she had faced growing up. One day, she spoke of the life she had been forced to live, pretending to be a boy, hiding her true identity from everyone, and enduring the cruelty of her father. She expected shock, disbelief, or even anger, but he simply listened, nodding gently, his eyes full of understanding. "You have survived so much," he said softly, "more than most could ever imagine. And yet, here you are, still kind, still patient, still brave." His words stirred something deep inside her. For the first time, she felt recognized not just for her struggles, but for the strength she had shown despite them. Her father, meanwhile, continued to grow suspicious. He noticed the changes in her demeanor, the quiet confidence that had begun to shine through, and the small moments when she seemed distracted or preoccupied. He questioned her, watched her closely, and occasionally tried to punish her for imagined missteps. Yet she had grown clever. She learned to navigate his moods with precision, to choose her words carefully, to take small risks that slowly allowed her to reclaim pieces of herself without inviting full wrath. Every act of courage was a delicate balance, and she had become adept at walking that line. The town began to notice the subtle changes in her as well. People who had once overlooked her started to recognize her quiet strength. A neighbor would smile at her in appreciation when she helped with chores. A merchant would nod in respect when she delivered goods on time. And children would follow her example in small acts of kindness. She realized that courage could inspire others, that even small acts of bravery could ripple through the lives of those around her. And for the first time, she began to imagine a life where she could exist openly, without fear, without hiding, and without the constant weight of her father's shadow. The man continued to play a quiet, guiding role in her transformation. He encouraged her to think beyond her immediate circumstances, to imagine opportunities, and to consider the possibilities that lay beyond the narrow confines of her life. He spoke of resilience, of hope, and of the potential within every person to rise above their circumstances. She listened eagerly, absorbing his words, and slowly, a plan began to form in her mind, a plan to step out of hiding, to claim her life, and to face the world as herself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town, he approached her with a seriousness she had not seen before. "I want to help you," he said. "Not just in small ways, but in a way that changes everything. You have been hiding for too long. It is time to live, to be free, and to be seen for who you truly are." Her heart pounded. Freedom had always seemed impossible, yet here he was offering it, tangible and real. She nodded slowly, understanding that the road ahead would be difficult, but that she could no longer remain hidden. The next days were filled with careful planning. They spoke in whispers, devised small steps to ensure her safety, and prepared for the eventual confrontation with her father. Each decision was measured, each action calculated to avoid unnecessary risk while still moving toward freedom. She practiced speaking with authority, moving confidently, and asserting her presence in ways she had never dared before. Every day, she felt the old chains of fear loosening, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of independence. Finally, the moment arrived. Her father, as always, was demanding and cruel, attempting to exert control in his usual way. But this time, she did not shrink or retreat. She met his gaze steadily, spoke clearly, and refused to be intimidated. "I am not a boy," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am who I am, and I will not live in fear any longer." His face twisted in shock, then rage, but she did not falter. Years of preparation, years of small acts of courage, had built her strength, and she finally allowed it to shine. The man from the square appeared at the right moment, offering support without confrontation. He did not challenge her father with anger or violence. He simply stood beside her, a silent protector, signaling that she was no longer alone. The father, confronted with both her courage and the presence of someone powerful and observant, had no choice but to step back. The dynamic that had ruled her life for so long began to shift, and the shadow of fear that had dominated her existence began to lift. With her father temporarily subdued, she began taking control of her life. She reclaimed spaces in the town, visited markets without fear, and allowed herself small pleasures she had long denied, laughing with children, sharing meals with neighbors, and speaking freely in public. Each step forward was exhilarating, and each act of independence reinforced the idea that she could survive, thrive, and exist without hiding. The bond with the man deepened. He became a mentor, a guide, and eventually a source of genuine care and companionship. He encouraged her to explore her talents, to dream beyond the narrow confines of her previous life, and to trust herself. She learned to speak with confidence, to navigate social interactions, and to stand firmly in her identity. For the first time, she felt that she could shape her destiny rather than merely survive it. Days turned into weeks. She began to establish herself as an independent, confident young woman. The town came to respect her for her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering kindness. People who had once overlooked her now sought her advice and assistance. Had become a quiet force in her community, someone who had emerged from fear to claim her place in the world. The relationship with the man remained central to her transformation. He never forced her to reveal more than she was ready to share, and he never judged her past. Instead, he celebrated her growth, encouraged her independence, and offered guidance when needed. She began to see him not as a distant figure, but as a partner in her journey, a person who had helped her navigate the path from fear to freedom, from hiding to living. One evening, as they walked through the town square together, she realized how far she had come. She no longer walked with her head down, no longer feared the judgment of others, and no longer allowed her father's shadow to dominate her thoughts. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and claimed her life. And in that moment, she understood that the journey was not just about escaping fear, it was about discovering strength, courage, and the ability to live authentically. Her father remained a part of her life, but his control had diminished. She had established boundaries, asserted her independence, and demonstrated that she could survive without succumbing to his intimidation. The power dynamic had shifted, and she no longer felt trapped. She had learned that fear could be faced, that courage could be cultivated, that support from others could transform even the darkest circumstances. The man remained by her side, a quiet presence, a steady guide, and eventually, a companion she could trust fully. Together, they navigated the challenges of life, building a relationship based on mutual respect, understanding, and care. He had seen her when no one else had, acknowledged her strength, and helped her realize her potential. She had grown from a frightened girl into a confident young woman, capable of facing the world without hiding. In the end, she understood that her life had been shaped by fear, but it was no longer defined by it. She had learned to navigate challenges, confront danger, and cultivate courage. She had discovered the value of trust, kindness, and genuine connection. And most importantly, she had found someone who saw her for who she truly was. Supporting her as she stepped fully into her own life, the town watched her transformation with quiet admiration. The girl who had once been hidden, fearful, and silent had emerged as a force of resilience and grace. She had reclaimed her identity, embraced her strength, and forged a life built on courage rather than fear. And with the man by her side, she looked to the future with hope, determination, the knowledge that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her journey had been long, filled with struggle, fear, and uncertainty, but it had led her to a place of empowerment, self-discovery, and freedom. She had learned that even in the darkest circumstances, courage could emerge, trust could be found, and a life beyond fear was possible. And as she stepped into that life fully, she understood that the girl behind the boy had finally been uncovered. And with it, a world of possibilities awaited.